Vimala, your journey spans across continents, as I said in the earlier introduction. You've had a variety of roles in the corporate world, and you've also been a migrant or an immigrant to Australia. How have your Southeast Asian heritage and international experience shaped your approach to advocating for unrepresented women?
Thank you, Sandra. I grew up in Malaysia, and my grandparents came to work from India to Malaya to work in the British colonies. And they came to work as laborers. As I was growing up, I was told not to bring up difficult topics and raise topic that's considered difficult when I was growing up. Malaysian Indians underrepresented in the corporate and the public sector. And we didn't really kind of a challenge that. I was told to please not rock the boat. So don't rock the boat, study hard. And to an extent that served me. I studied hard. I qualified as an attorney, and I got a job in a multinational company. And I've been very privileged. I've lived and worked across many countries. And in all the places that I've been, I avoided talking about how I was different. And that was not the thing to do because, of course, don't rock the boat. And then the pandemic happened, and I was alone. I was working in Europe. I was alone in my apartment, and I had a lot of time to think. And even though I had mentored lawyers, Sandra, I realized that I haven't really talked about my stories, my origin story, where I came from. So I started then reaching out to Black and brown women and other women and talking about my experience of being a woman of color in corporate. And whether we were from Calgary or Melbourne or Perth, there was such a similar thread in what we had gone through, really needing to have bundles of resilience, having to prove ourselves over and over again. And now I have clients who are in my coaching business who are white, and there are similar stories that comes in there as well. So that's where really my desire to empower unrepresented women grew from, Sandra.
Yeah, that's a powerful start. Throughout your career, you've often been the only one in many work settings, and we previously had Christine Castley, the CEO of Multicultural Australia, and that's also been her experience where she's been the only one in many work settings. How has this experience of solitude and uniqueness fueled your passion for creating a more inclusive and equitable work environment for others?
Yeah, I saw that episode with Christina. It was an amazing episode. So I mentioned that Malaysian Indians were underrepresented in corporates, and that was my experience when I worked in Malaysia. And I remember this instance where, when I was still working in Malaysia, and I had a backhanded compliment from one of my line managers, and he said, you're so hardworking, you could go out in the fields and work in the sun and come back and still finish this document. And I was gobsmacked. There were polite laughter all around. This comment was made in a group of people. And I don't think he had a bad intention until this day. He's a really good person, but he didn't have the realization to see how that joke could actually exclude people. And I definitely felt like the weird one out. And this kind of jokes, and we have vocabulary for that now, microaggressions, which we didn't have when I just started my career in Malaysia. It makes you really hyper vigilant and hyper aware. You just don't feel safe. And I know how that feeling feels like. I know how it feels to be so uncomfortable in your own skin, that it really created a passion for me, to help other women and empower other women who've been through similar situation, whether it's because of the color of their skin, their ethnicity, or any other attribute. So just remembering that sometimes it brings back memories.
I'm still recovering from that comment. Oh
Mm.
my gosh, that is absolutely disgusting. And it is very graceful of you to say, he's a nice person and it wasn't meant with ill intent. I think now, obviously, times have changed and there's a lot of
Mm.
educational content out there. And I think if a comment like that was made in this day and age, there's no excuse. There's no excuse. Educate yourself, people. You do not say things like that. Oh my goodness. Wow.
I think that's possibly one of the issues is people don't feel that what they're saying is offensive to anybody, but that it's a to one person. It could be an off the cuff remark, but you need to look at context. You need to look at who you're dealing with, who you're speaking with, in what environment are you speaking, and then just think what will the impact be. But Vimala, you've talked about empowering women in that situation, but I think there's a lot still to be done in educating people within organisations on
Yes.
what they say, how they say it, and impact of it. And there's comedians out there who go, "Oh, people are too sensitive." I'm thinking of Ricky Gervais in particular, but he's a white Anglo male, and I'm sure he's had his own issues in his life. But just to say other people just need to harden up, I don't think that cuts it anymore. It's not funny anymore, and it's not appropriate.
I absolutely agree, Sandra, that it's two sides to a coin. Of course, with leaders, especially this person was a leader, need to get better at communicating for inclusion. For instance, in Australia, there was a client of mine who shared on how there's this senior person in her organization who only talked about footy when he was having casual conversations. So it was either work or footy. And she's an immigrant person. She doesn't know footy culture. She didn't know the terms. Like I learned terms like the Dockers and the Eagles, but she didn't know them. And she was trying to, of course, assimilate and understand them better, but she was lost in the conversations. So even though, again, without ill intent, you can see how those conversations exclude people who are not in the know.
Very much so. Yeah. Starts at the top. It always
starts at the top.
We had earlier. It's the same thing. It's in the culture. It's don't look at the junior levels or the people coming into the organisation. Have a look at the top. Have a look at what the culture says about itself. I've been doing a little bit of work on doing an article on unwritten ground rules, and they are there for everybody to see, especially when you're coming into an organisation. And it doesn't matter what the culture says or what the mission says and the vision says. Have a look at how people are treated, and those conversations at the water cooler about the footy that exclude probably half of the people there. And again, it's that personality dictating the conversations that are had instead of sitting back and being a proper leader and asking people what interests you, what can we find together to discuss and to talk about.
Absolutely.
To build our relationship.
Yeah. And we're not saying that don't have these conversations. Have these conversations, but be very aware of the people around you. I had an incredible leader. I've had a mix of, I don't know why I just never got an okay leader. I had either really great leaders or really toxic leaders. Like, could I just get a normal one? But anyway, one of the greatest leaders I ever had in Australia was this man who, having a conversation. So if he was standing, again, these water cooler conversations, if I was standing and talking to maybe two people and it was like a circle, if someone was approaching, he would open the space up so that that person would naturally fit in and you don't have to try and squeeze or just look awkward standing around the circle in the outside. And he would open it up. And one of the things he'd always ask during meetings is that relatable? Does that make sense? So again, he loved footy and we had a conversation around this. And I said, you know what? I don't know anything about footy, but I love cricket. And then he would always try to explain what he meant when I was talking about footy. And if we're talking about cricket, we'll talk about cricket because he also loved cricket. So it's these small things that up to now, I still think of that leader, and he's one of the greatest leaders I ever had. I mean, he was tough, but he was fair. And we're not saying don't have these conversations, but just be aware of who's around.
I am just to expand on what you said, and such a great example of a great leader. It is not about then diminishing Australian culture at all. Have the conversations, as you said, about footy, and find how that's relatable to others. And it's not only footy. So Australian culture, in multicultural Australia, we have so many things in common that we can talk about. So thank you for sharing that, Em.
It's good to see a nice balance, actually, of how to have the conversation and how perhaps you could do better. Elevating called women to find their confident voices is a significant part of your work, Vimala. Can you share a transformative moment or success story that highlights the impact of your coaching on called women and, particularly those facing mid-career challenges?
Yes, Sandra, sure. So I was working with a woman who had been let go of her role, and a role that she absolutely loved. So her confidence really took a hit. And before this, she's actually fantastic at a job, was kicking goals, got promotions. And this shift really took the carpet under her feet. So she started really dreading, and she's an introvert, started dreading even more having conversations with people, reaching out to people. And she actually said that going to interviews was dreadful. So when we worked together, Sandra, what happened was she really managed to see that she had been telling herself so many lies. And they are lies. They were not at all true. So, you have the critical inner voice, and they were feeding her bunkum, and it got her feeling really small. So after working together and realizing that she was far more than the stories she's been telling herself, she managed to get a job at a really good company. And I'm happy to say she's still in there, really kicking goals again, more happier than what she was in the previous job. So that is every time I feel low, I look at her testimonial and I'm like, it makes my day.
Absolutely. And no wonder. Those stories we tell ourselves, they're a killer, aren't they?
Yeah, they're a killer. And I think, I'm not sure if you've heard of this term. If someone else spoke to you the way you speak to yourself, or the way your inner voice speaks to you, you would have shouted with them by now. So we are really very harsh with ourselves, especially when you have that conditioning as women to be really putting yourself down, not bragging. And then you add the intersectionalities to that. It's a toxic combination.
I read today in the morning that 80%, like psychologists have proven that most of us, 80% of the time have negative thoughts. 80%.
Yeah.
Gosh.
I couldn't, it blew my mind away. And I think it's because we really don't pay attention to our thoughts, but they impact so much of our lives. What guidance, Vimala, would you offer to women, particularly those from cult backgrounds who are navigating obstacles in the middle of their careers?
Thank you for sharing that statistic. That doesn't surprise me at all. And based on the work that I do. And one of the things that I think to break that negative thoughts, because when we are going through obstacles, that's not necessarily when we are feeling our best, when we are feeling confused, when we are feeling low about ourselves. It's very easy to go, why me? Why is this happening? I've been a good person. I've been a good girl. Why is this happening? And one of my mentors told me, that the quality of your life is dependent on the quality of your question. So why me is, with all due respect, a really bad question, because it puts us in a victim mentality. And what happens is that it perpetuates this feeling of helplessness. Just imagine, why me? Oh, I'm helpless. And it focuses on our misfortune instead of what else can we do. Whereas high quality questions encourages us to identify steps, encourages to get creative. So questions like, okay, what can I learn from this? Sounds so simple, but it's powerful when asked because it tells us, okay, what can I learn from this? I need to research the company better when I'm going for my next role because I want to see the cultural environment. Who can I reach out on LinkedIn that has worked or is working in this company to really find out what's going on the ground. So that's I think the questions part of it is what I work with my clients and empower them to ask themselves this question. And I hope our listeners will do that as well. When you're going through a really tough time, just write down great questions that you can ask yourself and then answer them, because our brains, amazing creatures for us, it's like a faithful dog. Throw it a stick and it'll go and get it for you. So throw it a question and your brain will get you the answers.
Wow, that's very powerful. A little bit related to that is something that Em and I have discussed, I'm sure, in the past. I'm not sure if we've done it on air, is that when you are in that 20% of your time when you are feeling empowered, fantastic, just joyful about yourself and the world, that's when you get out your journal or your pieces of paper and write a note to yourself, write a reference for yourself, put down all of those positive thoughts so that when the 80% of the time sneaks up on you, don't listen to those voices. Listen to what you've already told yourself when you're feeling 100% or 110%. So it's interrelated. And, yeah, I think that's a really fun thing to do. And
I just to expand on what you're saying, I just love it. I actually have post-its on my table with things that I've written or testimonials that I've had, good recommendations that I have, just to remind me, hey girl, you rock.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. We all rock.
Love it.
Oh, dear. So with your company, Mosaic Working, you've taken significant steps already to fulfilling your mission of inspiring, engaging, uplifting individuals and organisations. So what's next for Mosaic Working, and how do you envisage its role in fostering a just and equitable society?
Thank you, Sandra. I've got this saying that I'm fond of. Great jobs and places at the table is not like slices of pie. You know, when you have pie, when I have a slice, that means there's less for you and less for everyone else. Well, great jobs and opportunities are not pie. It is not about taking from a limited supply and leaving less behind. It's about, a rising tide. I've heard that analogy being used. A rising tide lifts all boats. And I completely believe that that's not naive, because that comes from a place of abundance as opposed to a place of dividing scarcity. So when one of us succeeds, a woman of color, a man, it's not at the expense of others. It raises the precedent, it raises our skill set, and we are celebrating each other. So that's to me, how we contribute to a just and equitable society, when we see that everyone's boats, the immigrants, the people who have been here for generations, we all rise together instead of guarding the limited supply of slices of pies.
Absolutely. That is so wise. I love it. And it's such a simple analogy.
I know. But it's so powerful, and I think it's a great place for us to end episode today. Like, we don't want to end it. We want to keep going because this has been such a great conversation. And one of the things you've mentioned, Vimla, and to you, Sandra, as well, during our conversation, is the fact that there is enough room for all of us. And I think the more that we practice it in the way we talk, in the way we advocate for other people, not seeing the inclusion of others as a threat, but seeing it as something that enriches our communities, enriches our organizations, will be all the better for it. So when the table around you and the people around the table look like you, start asking yourself these questions. What are we actively doing in our organizations? Or what am I actively doing in my friendship circles to expand the people that surround me, to talk to people that I would ordinarily not talk to, or to hire someone whose accent makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, So we all collectively have a role to play. We all collectively have a role to make our communities, our organizations the best they possibly can. Because if we don't, we're robbing the future generations of an equitable, justifiable, great society. And Vimla, can you tell us, if our listeners want to hear from you or just follow your journey, where can they find you?
And they can find me on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, Vimala Thangaveloo, and I think my name will be in the show notes. And please follow and reach out to me on direct messaging, DMs.
And if they want to work with you?
Send me a DM.
Perfect. So Sandra and I have been greatly empowered just from this conversation. So I can imagine how your clients benefit from working with you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and your passion and your heart. It's been an incredible perspective hearing from you and understanding your journey and your passion in building an equitable society that we can all thrive in. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Empowered Voices Amplified. Sandra and I have definitely been empowered by Vimla. Vimla, thank you so much for your time today. And to our listeners, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Empowered Voices Amplified. Please let us know what you think of this episode if you have any questions, and we will get back to you. Thank you again and have a great week.